Are you starting a new business in 2021? Then it's likely you are going to make one of these mistakes. As a business accountant, my team and I spend all day long helping business owners on their journey. And of course, early in a year, there are a lot of startups of people getting going on their New Year's resolutions and everything else to make those new businesses work in the new year. And being very lucky position we get to work closely with a lot of these people. And what we found over the years of doing this is that the team and I have found themes, I suppose, and I want to use mistakes loosely because sometimes that's a bit of a harsh word, but they're errors and common misconceptions in a lot of ways, and I wanted to sort of debunk some of those in a video so that hopefully you can get sort of the best start. Now, a bit of a caveat: I'm not a business coach. I've been self-employed since my late teens and have ran multiple businesses, including obviously the one we're sitting in today. So some of this comes from a business owner's experience as well, but ultimately it's working with business owners every day, and we just see common themes. So that's the angle I'm talking to you about this. And of course, as accountants, some of it is going to be based around finances and planning, but I think there is a nice mix of topics inside of this video. So before we get into it, if you like this type of thing, click the subscribe button below and you get notified whenever we release another one just like it. So let's get into it. I think the first one, as accountants, people quite often come to us and say, can you help me with a business plan, or can you look over my finances, these kind of questions. And of course we can, we've got services for those. But a lot of the time, the question comes around like, oh, do you think I've got the right costs in, and da-da-da-da-da. The actual answer to that question most of the time is, let's just ignore the costs for a minute. Let's talk about how you're going to gain customers, because one of the biggest issues with new businesses is, I think, the underappreciation, and that would be sort of mistake one, is that they fail to understand how long it takes to get customers, and that's really, really important. I think that obviously you can put anything you like in a projection. You can say, oh, I think I'm going to get $2,000 a month, in 3 months' time, and all the rest of it. But from our experience, that run-in is vastly longer than you expect. So, and failing to recognize that can cause you a problem early on. So I think failing to recognize how long it takes would be the first one. But linked to that as point two would be that actually the problem is people don't take enough action around getting new customers. So they might have a brilliant website, or they might, post on social media 3 times a week or something like that. And they've got this brilliant website. They might have paid some SEO or some Google ads or something, and they've got this, bit of social accounts here, and they're doing a bit of Instagram and all those kind of things. And ultimately, they are really good things to do. But what we find is, in the majority of cases, you actually need a wide approach to getting clients. Don't get me wrong, there'll be business coaches, I'm sure, that will tell you there's really good niche ways of doing it. Like if you can come up with a really good one-to-one relationship with somebody who can refer you, that works quite well. There are referral organizations like BNI, networking things, they work very well in a lot of cases as well. So there's all these types of angles, but obviously the best one to do is all of them. But you've only got so much time in the day, you've actually got to do some work. But I think being proactive about it and also educating yourself around the things you can do is really, really important, because for a lot of people coming into new businesses and setting them up, you're probably really good at doing the thing, whether that's creating the product you're going to sell because you're passionate about it, or use an accountant. You start up an accountancy business, you might be a really good accountant, but how do you go out and find customers? And the answer is, I think you need to educate yourself on all of the different things and try them and see what works for you. But if you're sitting around in your office trying to get your website wording bang on, and you're not going anywhere, and you're just waiting for people to turn up, it's unlikely that that's going to happen as quick as you hope that it would. I'm sure there's probably some outliers there, but generally that's the case. And that is a common thing. I think people commit to a lot of expenditure early on and invest in the business because they think things are going to come, and that's very important. I'd always say to people, if you've got that capital to invest in a good start, then of course you should get the right advice, the right kit, everything you need, a very good website. But ultimately, if you're not doing the other actions that go alongside it, you may struggle. So bit of a long one, that one, but point two for me would be to make sure that actually you're doing enough of the actions to get those customers. And then that brings in then to, of course, one of the key things for us is failure to plan your costs appropriately, and actually just your cash in and out. And I'm sure we've done other videos on this where we've talked about, how to start a business and those kind of things, and this will always come into it, but having some idea of what your finances look over the initial period. Now, I could get you to take away anything from this video, I'd want to see you have a look at the next 6 months and just work out your ins and your outs to see what that looks like, including how much cash you personally need to survive on in that time. Because one of the things people will do is, not take into account that, you've got to live, and it might be you have to live a little bit leaner to make this work, but having some sort of plan. And I'm not talking about some massive business plan, I'm just talking about, simple spreadsheet. You can do it on a bit of paper if you wanted, but, ins and outs, what you predict that's going to be. But taking back to points 1 and 2, that top line, that income, make it look worse than you think it's going to be initially, because then you've got the scenario, a base case scenario where you know how long you can go without doing this before you have to start looking at whether you need to be doing Deliveroo or something to supplement this income. So have a look at those things and plan, and make sure that you've tried to account for as many costs as you can. So whether you seek someone like an accountant or a business advisor or somebody to help you make sure you've got all those costs, or even if you can just get in front of a business owner that you know to help you make sure that you've kind of got everything that you need, because one of the key things, of course, is you've not been in business before. How are you going to know what all those costs are going to be? Inevitably, you're going to miss some. So failure to plan around those finances would be a big one, including not taking into account tax. So of course, you might decide that you're going to take £2,000 a month in your plan, and brilliant, but then you haven't actually accounted for some of the tax. And we talk about how to deal with those things in other videos, but there are some general rules you can do to put some money aside for tax. But for now, just know that you do need to account for those. I think if I looked at most plans, nearly all of them fail to account for actually the tax at the end of it, which they think I'll sort that out later, because with generally with self-employment or in a limited company, you tend to earn all your money, it's all yours, and then you get a period of time before you've got to hand it over. And some people think, well, I'll earn the tax and pay it. But the problem with it is, if this period is less money than this period, you're not going to be able to live and pay the tax. So it's a good idea to sort of plan as you go. And then with that, the failure to plan point, I suppose the next point would be that actually it's still financially planning, but it's not necessarily that cash flow. It's having a look at how much you've got to sell. Now, I don't necessarily mean, if you're a service-based business, it's going to be built up by, here are my costs, here's the income I want to, you can work it backwards, here's the income that I want to take home. So therefore, the sales need to be this. And obviously you need to decide what happens if that's not the case. But with products particularly, I think a lot of people setting up e-commerce businesses or website-based direct-to-consumer where you're selling goods, they haven't worked out the full amount you would need to sell to have the quantity. So they might think, oh yeah, that's £10,000 of sales. But by the time you've deducted what it costs, what the postage costs and all the rest of it, you might only make, say, 30%. So out of your 10 grand of sales, it's only £3,000 before you've paid any of your overheads, like accountancy, insurance, rent if you've got offices, these kind of things. And if you work that backwards, you have to sell an awful lot of product. And I think that's one of the key things we see is people look at top line, as in the figure coming in the bank, and don't actually take into account what the true profit is and how much you would have to sell. So understanding that number would really help. What I personally, I love this is what I'm going to have to sell over a year to make this work, and then you bring it right back to how much per day you need to be selling. And I think that's a cool one. So then you've got a target every day of, have I sold this? Have I sold this? If I know I've done this, then we're in a good place. Now, of course, with a service-based business, it might be slightly different, but it's still good to have an idea of what you should be trying to turn over or invoice or have in your pipeline, especially if you've got a long pipeline for that work to come in, so that you've got an appreciation of how long and are you actually hitting the right targets? Because that should drive, going back to point 1 and 2, is it should drive your actions. If you're not moving towards your financial plan, you're not hitting those targets, then you've got to look at what you're doing and mix it up a bit to see if you can push towards those targets and make sure that at the end of the day, you can live. And then the final point I would say is, I think for a lot of business owners, they don't get the right amount of help or the right help that they need at the beginning. I think there can be this feeling that, you need to do it all alone. And don't get me wrong, sometimes budgets mean that you might not have the money you need for paid help, but there are plenty of people and you can look at online. I suppose the key one for me is making sure that the people you're listening to are the right people. If you're watching randos on YouTube talking to you about certain things, are they credible? Have you done your research on them? Make sure that the advice is good. And the same if you're talking to people in your own circles. Just because your friend has a side business doing X or Y doesn't mean that actually that is going to translate to what you're doing. So go out, put the feelers out. Ultimately, if you can invest in good advice, whether it be coaches, accountants, and all the rest of it, they're key pieces of advice that might help you. And we've seen some really successful people coming through who do that. And of course, a lot of the time it depends on funding. I've seen where people have been made redundant, they've got a pot of money there, which is helpful because then they can invest in decent website, some help from an accountant, potentially a coach, these kind of things they might need. Because if you've never been in business before, it can be a shock to the system, to the type of skills that you would need to actually be all rounded and do it. And you will find you've got weaknesses that in, say, a corporate job, you might not have had. So definitely, if you can, make sure that you get the right people around you to kind of create that team to support your business as you go in. Well, that's it. Really quick one. A few tips in there for you, but for me, it's just appreciating how long and how hard a journey it can be from the beginning and making sure that you understand the impact on your finances. Shock horror, accountant talking about finances. So that's it. If you've enjoyed this video, share it with people you think might get some value, and I'll see you in the next one.